Hello, and welcome to How Not to Retire, a psychological approach to a healthy and wealthy retirement. Episode 49, Freedom. Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer. In this podcast, we rethink what it means to live a meaningful life, especially after the 9 to 5 is behind you, or maybe not behind you just yet. Today I want to discuss freedom, but not in the way most people typically do. Not the bumper sticker version, not the I do what I want kind. Let me tell you a quick story. Picture a kitchen. It's late afternoon. A teenager is slumped at the table, arms crossed, face locked in that classic mix of boredom and defiance. Across from him, his grandfather, recently retired, kind of sits with a cup of coffee flipping through the job listings again. Teenager. I just want to be free, Grandpa. Like, do what I want to do, you know? I'm sick of school, sick of rules. Everyone's always telling me what to do. Grandpa snorts. Tell me about it. Teenager. You're old, you're free, you're retired. You don't have to do anything. Grandpa. Yeah, funny. Last month, I tried that. Sat around, watched TV, slept in, thought I'd feel free. Turns out I felt useless. So what? Now you're looking for a job again? Not because I need the money, son. Because I can't stand feeling like I don't matter. I spent 40 years working for someone else. Now I'm free to do what I want, and I don't even know what that is anymore. So freedom isn't doing whatever you want? Well, maybe it's doing what you ought to do. That conversation hits me pretty hard because it shows something we don't talk about enough. Freedom isn't about doing whatever you feel like or whatever you want. That kind of freedom will spin you in circles. It'll chain you up. Just consider the person who wants another drink, despite the fact that it's ruining their life. That's not freedom. It's captivity disguised as a choice. Think about this. The teenager wants out of the system. The retiree wants back into something, anything that feels meaningful. Both are chasing the same thing, but neither one has quite figured it out. So today, what we're going to unpack is what is freedom, really. We'll talk about why doing what you want might not lead to happiness, probably won't, and why doing what you ought, yep, that old-fashioned word, might be the real doorway to a life that matters. And the intention is to clear up something that's often confused, the difference between should and ought, because one comes from the outside and the other, it comes from somewhere deeper. So whether you're 17 or 70, please stick with me. Let's take a hard look at this idea of freedom and why retirement, if we're not careful, might feel less like a reward and more like a trap. So let's get back to the word freedom. Most of us grow up with a pretty basic idea. Freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. No parents, no boss, no alarm clocks. Just you and your choices. That's the dream, or so we say. You hear it in teenagers all the time. I just want to be free, which usually translates to something like, I want to play video games till 2 a.m. in the morning. I want to eat pizza for breakfast without anybody nagging me. Here's the twist. You hear almost the same thing from people at the other end of life. Retirees say things like, now I can finally do what I want, or I don't have to answer to anyone anymore. Does that sound like freedom? Let's be real. Sometimes it's more like a freefall. No map, no anchor, just you, the unknown, and the weight of figuring it out. And yet that's where you can find strength. Not in knowing the way, but in choosing to act the right way, doing what you ought to do, grounded in the principles we shared in the last podcast. We live in a culture that tells us freedom is about escaping limits. No rules, no obligations, no structure. But what if we've got it wrong, completely wrong? They couch it like it's us versus them. But what they're couching it as, we're escaping the rules of others. We're escaping the man, right? Because if freedom means doing whatever you feel like, what happens when you feel like doing is actually self-destructive? Remember the allusion to the alcoholic earlier? What if your desires aren't wise or generous or even coherent? A mother once brought in her 20-year-old son to me, hoping I could straighten him out, right? It was clear from the start he wasn't going to say a word as long as she was in the room. So I gently asked her to wait outside. When we were alone, I started asking simple questions like, what do you want? Where do you see yourself going? At first, his answers echoed his parents' goals, but as we dug a little deeper, it became clear he didn't really resist the goals themselves or what his parents wanted him to do. He resisted the way they were imposed. Everything felt like a should, filtered through someone else's version of right. You see, it wasn't about truth or principles. It was about control. I explained that I wasn't interested in what he thought I wanted to hear. I wanted his real answers, his authentic goals, without judgment. And when he finally shared them, everything shifted. And that's when the real session, the coaching session, began. We talked about freedom, not as doing whatever you want, but as choosing to do what you ought to do. What would your higher or best self do? Not an obligation, but a principle. Not compliance, but alignment with the principle. His resistance had nothing to do with laziness. It was a longing for ownership. As his understanding of principle-based living deepened, so did his hope. It stopped being about what his parents wanted him to do. It became about what he wanted to do, grounded in his values, driven by purpose, and guided by these timeless principles. That shift from external pressure to internal ownership is everything. When someone begins to act not out of compliance but conviction, motivation transforms. It's an internal motivation. It's no longer about avoiding conflict or seeking approval. It's about aligning choices with core values. That's the foundation of lasting change. And this isn't just for 20-year-olds dragged into counseling. It applies to all of us. We often confuse freedom with the absence of restraint. But real freedom isn't found in doing whatever you want. It's found in knowing what's right and choosing to live it, even when it's not comfortable. That's the power of principle-based living. It anchors you when life feels like a freefall. It gives direction when there's no clear map. And most importantly, it restores hope. Because now the path forward isn't someone else's, it's yours. Philosopher Charles Taylor referred to this as the ethic of authenticity, a modern idea that being true to yourself means obeying your desires. Here's the catch. Desires are often conflicting with values. The era of authenticity is more or less the era of doing what you want to do. Your feelings are everything, and we've discussed this in previous podcasts. That is not principle-based. What happens when one part of you wants to sleep in, for example, but another part wants to build something meaningful, do something meaningful? Which part's the real you? This is where the conversation shifts. Because maybe freedom isn't about less responsibility. Maybe it's about choosing the right responsibility. Perhaps freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's having the strength and clarity to do what's worth doing. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote that freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. In other words, liberty without purpose doesn't make us free. It makes us restless, and I'll add to it, it puts us in bondage. So when the teenager says, I just want to be free, and the retiree echoes, yeah, me too, maybe what they're both longing for isn't a vacation from life, but a life with meaning. So let's look at this idea of doing what you want, what I refer to as the trap of wanting. It sounds great on the surface, but here's where things can get messed up, because sometimes what we want is just not good for us. Let me give you a really blunt example. An alcoholic wants another drink. That's what they feel like doing. That's the thing that's most important to them. I just want another drink. I want to be free, man. I just want to do what I want to do. But will that actually make them free? Or will it just dig them deeper into a hole they already cannot get out of? Desires are deceptive. They can promise relief, pleasure, escape, call it what you want, but they don't deliver freedom. In fact, the more we chase certain wants or desires, the more we can become enslaved to them. Viktor Frankl, who I've mentioned here, he put it this way: man is not free from conditions, but he is free to take a stand toward them. In other words, freedom isn't about avoiding limits. It's about choosing how we respond to them. If we're always reacting to cravings, impulses, or the next shiny thing, we're not really choosing anything. We're just being pulled along, dragged along, or we're just sitting in an inner tube going down the river wherever it takes us. And this isn't just psychology. It's ancient wisdom. Aristotle talked about the importance of virtue, which he defined as habits that help us flourish. Freedom, for him, wasn't just the ability to act. It was the ability to act well, ought to do, to choose the noble path, even when it's hard. Think about people who spend their retirement chasing pleasure, more travel, more food, more entertainment. At some point, it stops feeling free. I see these people on cruises, cruise after cruise after cruise. It starts feeling empty. Why? Well, because we weren't made to just consume. That's not who we are. We were made to contribute, to create, to grow, to learn, to change. That teenager slamming their bedroom door wants freedom from homework. The retiree staring at a blank calendar wants freedom from deadlines. But both of them may feel lost even after getting what they thought they wanted. Because freedom without direction is like a car without a steering wheel. It moves, sure, but where is it going? So the question becomes, what do we want most? Not in the moment, but in the long run. Are we willing to discipline our lower wants in service of our higher ones? That's the difference between wanting and wisely wanting. So we're going to talk about two words now that carry a lot of weight: should and ought. They probably sound familiar, if not the same, but they're not quite the same. And the difference between them is the key to understanding real freedom. Okay, let's start with should. You should go to college. You should save for retirement. You should be more productive. You should smile more. You should wear this, think that, act like this. Should is almost always about expectations, what the world wants from you. It can come from parents, bosses, social media, or that nagging voice in your head that's been trained to please everyone except your value structure. And sometimes shoulds are useful. Sometimes they provide us with structure, helping us to function in society, but usually they do more harm. If left unchecked, should becomes a quiet tyranny. You end up living someone else's life, checking boxes you didn't create, chasing approval that never quite satisfies. Now let's shift over to ought. Ought is different. It's quieter, but heavier. It doesn't shout. It nudges. It's the part of you that knows what's right, even when it's hard. It's your best self. It's not about other people's opinions. It's about your principles, your conscience, and your purpose. You don't ought to please your boss. You don't ought to buy a bigger house because your neighbor did. You ought to tell the truth. You ought to help when someone's in need. You ought to live with integrity, even when no one's watching. Ought is where freedom lives. Because when you follow your ought, you're not being pushed from the outside. You're being pulled, motivated, and supported from the inside. And that kind of direction, well, that's powerful. Think of whistleblowers like Frances Haugen, who left Facebook and exposed internal research about to harm users. She didn't do what she should, keep quiet, stay employed, collect a paycheck. She did what she ought, and it cost her something. But it also gave her something, a sense of conviction, of agency, of freedom. Or think of someone like Fred Swaniker, who left a promising corporate path to create the African Leadership Academy. Now, he could have followed the shoulds of prestige and profit, but instead he followed his ought, his belief that nurturing young African leaders was more important. That choice wasn't easier, but it was purposeful. Even in retirement, this matters. You may not have a boss anymore, but you still have a choice. You can do what you should, what's expected of a retiree, travel, relax, fade quietly, or you can do what you ought. Mentor someone, volunteer, build something, speak up, show up. In the end, should is about image. Ought is about identity. And freedom? Real freedom? It's not about escaping obligation. It's about choosing the right one. So let's reframe retirement not as an end, but as a beginning. The way most of us picture retirement, it's kind of like a long vacation, right? No alarms, no meetings, no obligations. You've earned it. I'm not working for the man anymore, or I'm not, trudging through all those financials anymore. Yeah, rest is fine. It's good. It's necessary. But rest needs to be rejuvenation, not an eternal vacation. Here's something not many people say out loud. You can only rest so much before it stops feeling good. If every day is Saturday, eventually Saturday starts to lose its magic. Consider Mark. He retired at 62. He worked in finance for nearly 4 decades. First year of retirement was nothing but pure bliss. He traveled, played golf, bought a boat. But by year 2, he felt adrift. I thought I wanted freedom, he explained, but I didn't know what to do with it. Let's contrast that with someone like Sister Jean, the 100-year-old nun who became famous as the chaplain for Loyola's Chicago's basketball team. She didn't retire in the usual sense. She redirected her energy into students, prayer, encouragement, presence. Her life remains full of meaning because it's still in motion. Or let's take someone like John Leland, a New York Times journalist who spent a year interviewing people over 85. That would be fascinating. What he found was striking. The happiest among them were not the ones who focused on leisure, were not designed to live in leisure, but the ones who stayed connected to people, to purpose, to something larger than themselves. Here's the blatant truth. Retirement can be a trap if it's just about escape, rates of return, and basically bank balances. But it can be a launch pad if it's about expression. You finally have time, not just to rest, but to invest in others, in ideas, in things that matter. This is where ought comes back in. You might not have a boss anymore, but you still have a calling. Maybe it's mentoring younger folks in your profession. Maybe it's writing the story you never had time to tell. Maybe it's caring for your community in quiet, consistent ways. And yes, there's no one forcing you to do these things, but that's what makes them beautiful. You choose them freely. And that kind of freedom, well, that's the good stuff. That's the kind that fills you, not just entertains you. That's the kind that's inside out, not outside in. So if retirement is on your horizon, or already your reality, don't just ask what you want to do. Ask what you ought to do, and then go do it. So let's get back to where we started. The teenager slams the door and says, I just want to be free. A retiree sighs and says, now I can finally do what I want. And in both voices, we hear the same longing for something more than obligation, more than pressure, more than being told what to do. But maybe freedom isn't found in the absence of structure. Maybe it isn't about doing whatever we want. Perhaps it's about learning to distinguish between a fleeting desire and a deeper calling. We've looked at how wanting can trap us, how should or shoulding can wear us down, and how ought, that quiet, steady voice, can lead us somewhere richer. As we've seen that retirement, far from being the finish line, might be just a new kind of starting line, a chance not to step back from life, but to step into it in a new way. Not because someone told you to do it, but because you chose to, because you ought to. Here's the truth. You have more freedom than you've ever had. The question isn't whether you're free. The question is, what will you do with that freedom? Will you binge and coast, or will you build and serve? Because the people who come alive in retirement, the ones who radiate joy and clarity, they're not the ones chasing the comforts. They're the ones who found something worth giving themselves to. As Frederick Buechner once wrote, your vocation is where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. That doesn't end when the paychecks stop. If anything, it begins there. So, if you're feeling lost in your freedom, there's hope. It might just be time to listen, not to the noise of should, the outside noise, but to the whisper of ought, the inside value narrative. Because that whisper, that's where freedom really lives. Thank you so much for listening to How Not to Retire. If this message resonates with you, please share it. Share it with a friend, and maybe ask yourself, what do I ought to do now that I can? If you want to learn more about your retirement, I invite you to pick up my book, Your Encore Years, The Psychology of Retirement. You can get it on Amazon or on our website, How Not to Retire, or a new website we've created just for the book, Your Encore Years. And as always, don't try harder, try different.